Hello and welcome to another episode of Almost Breaking News. Welcome to the show. My name is Robert Llewellyn, and coming up on today's show, we are going to be hearing from our Australian roving reporter Sam Evans, better known as the Electric Viking. We are going to be hearing a report about the Fully Charged live show in Sydney from our very own Jack Scarlett, who may be appearing. And we've got a special interview with an amazing woman called Jane Hunter, who is CEO of Tritium. And they're the people who make some of the very high-speed chargers that more and more people around the world are relying on. All this and more from Almost Breaking News. Now, to start off with, a couple of short bits of news from Australia. First, a really positive bit, and then a really embarrassing, short-sighted, dumb bit. The good news is that the New South Wales government, that's the state government, the New South Wales coalition government, has announced plans to install more than 30,000 electric vehicle charge stations across the state by 2026. All they have to do between now and when they start doing this is win the next election, which is next month. And now I have no idea about the intricacies of New South Wales state politics, but I know installing and very, very importantly, maintaining electric charge points is critically important to the clean energy transition that is happening all over the world, and is now, Australia is catching up at record speeds. It is extraordinary what's going on here. That's the good news, or potentially good news. Now, the less good news, which is really confusing. In the beautiful state of Victoria, they have applied a truly ridiculous and crippling tax on electric vehicles to directly and deliberately support the fossil fuel industry. Now, there's plenty of places around the world where this is the case. It's not surprising. The fossil fuel industry is a very well-funded and aggressive lobby. But you may be surprised to learn that the Victorian government is a left-leaning coalition between the Australian Labor Party and the Greens. Now, they will wriggle and squirm and obfuscate by using some half-baked argument about poor, hard-working families and raising tax to support the state road network. But what they are really doing is ensuring that everyone in Victoria is trapped into relying on expensive imported toxic fuel to burn in dated, inefficient vehicles. That's what they're guaranteeing, that stranglehold of the fossil fuel industry has on all our lives is continued. They are directly, consciously supporting that, the Labor Party and the Greens in Victoria. Now, the neighbouring states of New South Wales and South Australia are actively encouraging people to drive electric vehicles. In South Australia, the installation of renewable energy means they are regularly producing over 100% of their electricity from renewables directly, and they export a lot of their excess renewably generated energy to Victoria. Now, I repeat, this tax is being levied by a coalition between the Victoria State Labor Party and the Greens. The future of the Victoria State road tax, labelled by the EV industry and its supporters as the worst electric vehicle policy in the world, goes to the High Court of Australia in Canberra this week, and that could be a landmark case for the industry. Now, a lovely chap called Chris Vanderstock has been in touch with me about this. He and Kath Davis are challenging the constitutional validity of the Victorian government's zero and low emission vehicle distance based charge act. Introduced in July of 2021, the ZLEV, better known as the EV tax, or I would call it the EV dismissal tax, or the EV you can't have one in Victoria, so forget it tax, is a 2.6 cent charge for every kilometre driven in an electric vehicle inside or even outside the state of Victoria. So if you live in Victoria and you've got an electric car and you drive it to Darwin, you've got to pay 2.5 cents a kilometre for every kilometre you drive all the way to Darwin, and the vast majority of those kilometres are going to be out of the state, but they still want the money. What you have to do in Victoria, this is hearsay, but I believe it's accurate, I've heard it from many people, is you literally take a picture of your odometer reading every year and you send it in. Yeah, that's going to work, isn't it? That's really going to work. It's hard to think that someone in that government hasn't been gently and politely nobbled by a very well-funded fossil fuel lobbyist. Allegedly, I've got no proof, but it is bizarre that this ruling absolutely supports the fossil fuel industry. I know these old left arguments. Oh, it's okay for you rich virtue signallers to pose in your fancy electric cars, but normal hard working families can't afford to buy an electric car. No, of course they can't. You numpties, it's a process. It's happening all around the world. Yes, some rich folks will buy electric cars and be virtue signalling posers. Ignore them. Then it becomes blindingly obvious that the technology is a much better solution. And it's not just cars. Are you taxing delivery vehicles, electric delivery vehicles, or buses, or trucks? Those are critically important. They're much more important than private cars. Climb down off your know-all, holier-than-thou horse. Let the loudmouth, bossy rich people hassle for more public charging, and more people get the cars. And then you don't have to rely on virtue signalling fashionistas with cash to burn. Normal people will benefit. Of course, people who drive electric cars should pay for the privilege of using a reliable road network. That is the case around the whole world, but not at this critically early stage when the right-wing press barons like Murdoch, Australian Murdoch, and his crooked fossil fuel bullying chums are doing everything they can to slow down the adoption, telling lies and spreading stupid propaganda, and you're absolutely pandering to them. Well done, Victoria Labour. You've helped Murdoch and his ultra-right-wing shock jock bullies to hold back the transition to a more sustainable method of ground transport. Anyway, by the time you see this, I will be in the state of Victoria, so if you don't hear anything more from me in future, I will be in one of the gulags for re-education. That's enough for me ranting. Over to the Electric Viking for some sensible, interesting electric vehicle news from Australia.
Hello, my friends. The Electric Viking here with an update on the Australian electric car market. What exactly is going on here in Australia? Well, the Tesla Model 3 absolutely dominated sales here in January in Australia. Seriously, an unbelievable month. The best month ever for an electric car here in Australia. It was the best-selling passenger car. In second place behind the Tesla Model 3 was the Tesla Model Y. Now, there was only 386 Tesla Model Ys delivered in January here in Australia, but the reason for that, of course, was that we are waiting for a shipment. As it is with Tesla, there is many months wait here for a Model Y. The Model Y is, without a doubt, currently the most popular electric car here in Australia, especially after Tesla reduced prices of that car only a couple of weeks ago by nearly 5,000 Australian dollars. For you guys in the UK, that's just under £3,000. Third best electric car here in Australia in January in terms of sales was the BMW X3, a bit of a surprising one, 384 sales in comparison to the Model 3, the best-selling EV in January with 2,927 sales. It was, not too bad, but not a whole lot of sales in comparison. However, this year things will be very, very different in the Australian car market. Like everyone else, like every other country in the world, we're about to get an onslaught of electric cars coming from China. Some of the new, lower cost, very affordably priced EVs that are coming to Australia and New Zealand and many other countries around the world this year include the Aura Funky Cat, or the Aura Good Cat, whatever you want to call it. Now, I'm in Thailand right now, and I just saw out the front of my apartment here an Aura Good Cat or a Funky Cat. I saw one of those almost, I think it was the second day that I arrived in Thailand. Then in the same exact street, and I'm not even near the city here, I'm miles away, I saw another one in a different color, only 100 meters away, in fact less than 100 meters away. Then of course the MG4. I know you guys in the UK have the MG4 already. Europe, MG4 is coming soon, definitely worth waiting for. That's probably going to be the star of the car market this year. The only question is not going to be how good is it. We know how good it is. I mean, look at you guys, your journalists in the UK have said how good it is. It's an amazing car for the price. MG4 is coming this year at around 40,000 Australian dollars. That's just over 22,000 pounds. What a bargain that'll be. Peugeot E308, we haven't been able to buy that, but they're coming this year too. And actually Australia is getting the Ford Mustang Mach-E this year. Going to be a lot of Ford fans here in Australia that have been waiting for the Mach-E. That could sell well too. Plus, Ford Mach-E's will be getting lithium iron phosphate batteries, which is awesome news. My friends, electric car sales in Australia are really, really starting to improve enormously. This year is going to be an amazing year, primarily because cheap, affordably priced electric cars from China are coming. They will force a lot of competitors from other countries to reduce their prices. And frankly, more supply, better prices means the EV onslaught is going to hit gasoline cars real damn hard. And I, for one, am very excited to see that.
Thank you, Sam. And now just a quick update about Fully Charged Live in Sydney on the 11th and 12th of March, which is going to be rather exciting. And I think there's someone coming over to visit as well. Let's have a look. It's building up to a really fabulous show. Let's see what is actually going on. I'm going to rely on someone younger and far more intelligent than me, a lot better looking. Over to you, Jack Scarlett.
Well, hello, Bobby Lou, you sickeningly tanned and healthy-looking man. Jack here from the big grey that is London. And the exciting news, at least for me, is that I'm coming to Sydney. I am coming to the Australia Live show. Couldn't let you have all the fun by yourself. And I'm so excited to be there. Number one, because I finally get to meet Elliot Richards, our China correspondent, in person for the very first time. You also meeting him for the very first time. Number two, I can't wait to meet our cast of phenomenal Oceania correspondents that have been making wonderful episodes for us in recent weeks. Rosie, Sam and Simone, all of whom will be joining us on the stage. Number three, I just can't stay away from a Fully Charged Live show. And this one has all the makings of a great FC Live. We've got the 2 stages with stimulating discussions all weekend long. We've got the home energy advice team. We've got almost every electric car available in Australia under one roof, which hasn't been easy. We've even got the Australian unveiling of the MG4, never before seen in Oz, one of the best and most affordable electric cars in the world right now, coming to you for the very first time in Australia at Fully Charged Live Sydney. I cannot wait to be there, Bobby. I cannot wait. See you soon.
We're now going to hear a quick word from the Electric Vehicle Council, who have been an enormous support to the Fully Charged team.
Hey Scotty, I thought you said these EVs were going to ruin the weekend.
I'm not in the crowd. You can call me up and no, you can't track me down. Wheels on the ground. I'm seeing where they're taking me. See you later. You can call me later 'cause I'm out right now. You can call me later 'cause I'm out right now.
You can see more from the Electric Vehicle Council and of course us at Fully Charged Live in Sydney on the 11th and 12th of March. Now, while I've been lucky enough, and my goodness, I accept this is a huge privilege to be here, lucky enough to be in Australia, I've had the chance to meet some amazing folks here and talk to them. We made quite a few shows here, but one of those amazing folks was at Tritium Chargers. Now, anyone who's ever driven an electric car and used a public charger, particularly in Europe, will know these machines well. I often refer to them as the ones that work when I talk about public charging infrastructure. Now, I had the chance to talk to Jane Hunter, the extraordinary CEO of Tritium, in their giant testing room at the Tritium R&D labs right here in sunny Queensland. So let's go back to basics then. But I mean, I know nothing about the history of Tritium, when it started, what the kind of aim of the company was, and what and where you see it going in the future. I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lovely story. It's actually sort of great story of a scale-up startup company that became a growth company that now has number 2 market share globally, and it really is amazing. And it's one of those great stories. 3 guys who were in the solar racing industry. And they were doing a lot of different things originally. So they knew they had something. They developed this power electronics building block that went in the car. And as you can imagine, it needed to be robust, needed to be small, it needed to be able to deal with a lot of heat because you're out in the outback, racing these things. And they knew they had something. And originally they were selling these to other solar racers.
Right.
And from there, they tried lots of different things. I mean, the founders would tell you how many, I think it's like 20, 25 different ideas. And then eventually they settled on, because of course they were always in the renewables game. And they always had their hearts in the conversion to e-mobility.
Right.
And so they eventually settled on this idea of a fast charger. They built their first fast charger in 2012, and then
Right.
2014 they sold their first fast charger. And they came at it in a different way than a lot of the rest of the industry. So if we think of, say, ABB, Siemens, Schneider, all your big electrical companies,
Yeah.
they're looking at it from the perspective of usually things are air cooled. So you deal with the heat by air cooling.
Well, having a fan that blows cool air through it,
Exactly.
right.
If you
Yeah.
think of it as a big box, you blow cool air through it and it comes out the other side hot,
Right.
and that's how you cool it. Whereas the guys came at it from an automotive perspective,
Right.
and so they used this environmentally friendly liquid coolant that
Right.
runs through the charger, and we remain the only fully liquid cooled charger today.
Right. That is, and it's also quite intriguing that in a similar way to the kind of established automotive industry, there's a kind of gasoline hangover in cars that are built by brands that we all know and grown up with.
Absolutely.
And when you see a brand that like some of the Chinese brands or Tesla or Polestar that haven't ever built combustion cars, they kind of approach it in a different way.
Entirely differently.
And that sounds like there's a similar thread to this.
Exactly. And I think we see it with Tesla, is that, they came at it from, in a way, more of a software
Yeah.
perspective than automotive. And so it's an entirely new car and it feels new. You hop in it and you feel like it's more like a piece of advanced technology than a car.
Yes, yeah. So when you've got the big box, because that's the great thing. I had no anxiety about coming, because there's some charging companies who build chargers that I would go to and go, I have had real trouble using your chargers. And I'm very grateful to say that whenever there's a Tritium charger, so there's a few companies that run your chargers in the UK,
There are.
they generally work.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure there's going to be cases, and I'll bet we'll get comments, well, I tried to use one, it didn't. Well, it's not, if it's not maintained, then it's always going to be a problem. But generally, they are the ones, and you see if you see on like the charging apps that people use, like ZapMap, the comments, they always go, yeah, don't you try and use this. Go to the Instavolt down the road. That always works. And now that's a Tritium charger.
Exactly. And what you say I hear quite regularly,
Right.
especially from early UK drivers. In fact, I was talking to the CEO of GridServe last time
Right.
I was over there, who you've probably seen.
I know
He's got
very well,
some
yeah.
beautiful
Yeah.
charging
Yeah.
networks there, with this great, model where there's a shop with a,
Yeah.
post office and a bookstore
And
and somewhere to go to the gym.
got a
and-
restroom, it's got
Yeah,
a
it's really
yes.
quite a phenomenal business model. And he was an early driver, as you can
Yeah.
imagine. I think he had a little Nissan Leaf and said,
Yeah.
look, in the early days of the industry, your chargers were the only chargers that worked. I
Yes,
used to
yes,
sort of go to
that
them because I
question.
knew that they would work. And that's been a point of difference for Tritium, which is, and let me talk you through it, because this is a little bit of a sense of confusion
Right.
for people, which is mean time between failure is how often does a machine break.
Right.
And Tritium's chargers have world-class mean time between failure.
Right.
When you're using power electronics, they're going to break, right? They
Right.
get hot. The more you use them, the more likely they are to break. So the higher the utilisation, the more cars that come up to a station and
Right.
use them in the course of the day, the more likely you are to eventually have an outage. And that's just basic mechanical
physics,
engineering.
yeah.
It's just physics, that's
Yeah.
right. But the difference for us is how often does the CPO or the network service the charger, and is
Right.
it being serviced under a free warranty, which comes with when you buy the charger, or is it being serviced under a service agreement?
Right.
And the future for the industry is that everyone will have a service agreement, much like
Yeah.
you have on the fuel forecourt. You might have 4-hour or 8-hour or 24-hour response times. And that hasn't yet occurred. It's a transition point for the industry. So a lot of chargers you'll find are either being serviced by the network operator, or they might be serviced under a free warranty, which is really just best efforts, much like
Yeah.
your fridge broke at home, Robert, and
Yeah.
you'd call somebody and they'd say, oh, I haven't got the pump. I'll see you,
Yeah.
in a week.
I'll get one
And that's not
eventually.
going to work for
Yeah.
drivers. So we can see that there's a different industry to be developed in
Yeah.
the future, but we're just not quite there yet, which is frustrating for drivers. It's frustrating for us,
Yeah.
because we would love, for the network to be more reliable.
Yeah.
But we also need for our customers to be becoming profitable and able to afford to put the money back into the network to keep the service agreements.
And I
up.
mean, one of the things I was intrigued to ask you, which isn't, again, not your, it's up to the network operators, but it's something I noticed the other day. So I drove up to the Sunshine Coast here in a Nissan Leaf, and when I got to the charger, which worked, it was perfect. It was a Tritium charger, but I couldn't get the app, because I've got an English phone with an English, and this is all to do with the phone company.
Yeah.
But in the UK, that exact same design of charger would have tap to pay.
Yes.
And so that's something you can build, because the British EV drivers love tap to pay.
Yes.
Because we've all had so many cards and apps, and then we just got sick of it and just go, can I just buy it like I buy a packet of crisps?
It's terribly difficult. And Europe had the issue where you'd move from country to country, network to network, and you had to sign up to 5 different apps. It's really difficult for the customer, and it does make the Tesla network really exciting for Tesla drivers because you just pull up, you don't need to tap, you don't need an RFID, you don't need to join an app, you just plug in and it recognises you. Now, all Tritium chargers can do plug and charge, so they can recognise the car. Almost all cars are enabled with that capability, and it's a matter now of the networks making the decision to make the jump to either plug and charge or auto charge or one of those standards where you can just plug in and it recognises the car.
Straight away. It's got to be
I think what will happen is a weight of numbers. So as some networks move, there'll be pressure on other networks to move because, frankly, the driver wants whatever's easiest for the driver.
And so you're building that in already. So your
already
chargers
there
already
in both the leasey chargers, so Gen 1, and in the new model Gen 2. All of them. In fact, I think we were the first plug and charge enabled chargers globally. We only have certain customers that use it. So Ionity does use plug and charge, but a lot of our networks don't yet use plug and charge. But look, as a driver myself, I'm sure you're the same, Robert, it's just fantastic. It's so easy. You don't have to get your credit card out. You just plug it in. In fact, it's quite hard to know how much you paid. For the, you tend to check your credit card statement and go, that's how much it costs.
But I mean, also that is, I think, going to be a critically important thing for as people, the old school, the old moaners like me. I've had my Nissan Leaf for 13 years, all that stuff. We should just shut up and move on. But the people who've just started, we've really experienced this in the UK in the last few months. Really, it's a huge increase in electric car ownership. People who've never used it before, and what you want is. How do you charge it? Well, this is a charger. You put that in there, and then you walk away.
Absolutely.
And do nothing else. That's
and
what
the
you've
thing
got
is,
to.
it does add complexity, not only to the driver when you're going up to how do I use it? How do I tap? What do I do? It's also a complexity for the machine. So it's another potential point of failure.
Yes.
And in fact, I was at the Sunshine Coast. Were you at Noosa? Is that where you went? Or?
Not quite as far as Noosa, no.
Right. So same thing. I was trying to use the app, and the app was actually connected to a different machine. So it was number 70, but it was actually connected to number 72. And I could see the poor old charger was trying to read it, but it was an app issue. Same with the credit cards. They're just a small additional point of failure, which you don't necessarily want. So the simplicity of that, the Tesla network, that's a great advantage for them. Unfortunately for them, though, that's a proprietary system. So if they want to do universal charging, they've got some work to do.
So So inside a charger, then it's a big box. I'm just thinking there's a big fat wire comes out of the ground and it goes and there's a really clever connector which someone has to bolt together, and then the wire goes into the thing that you plug in. But I've seen inside some of your chargers there's a couple of other bits in there.
There are, and I mean, I guess the simple way for your drivers to think about what's going on in a charger is there's 2 different sorts. There's a standalone where everything's in the one box. And for Tritium, we build up to 75 kilowatts at the moment in a standalone. After that, we move into what's effectively a distributed model where you've got a separate power unit, which usually you can't see it. It's probably sitting out the back somewhere. It might be in a basement on the same site. And the ultra-fasts are generally running in a distributed model. So the charger out the front is doing one piece of the work, and the power unit out the back, which looks like a big server rack, is doing the other part of the work. And effectively, the 2 bits of the job that has to happen in the machine is you've got to convert the AC from the grid to DC. And in a distributed model, that occurs in that separate box out the back. In a standalone, like our 75 and 50 kilowatt, that occurs in the one machine. And so when we can have a look inside one, what you'll see is you've got the AC to DC conversion occurring in a couple of modules, and then you've got the power electronics modules, which is effectively the guts of the charger. And each of those modules gives you the power. So we say have 325 kilowatts in a 75, and each of those gives you 25, then 50, then 75. If you lost one, you'd get 50 kilowatts. If you lost another, you'd get 25.
But the charger would still be working.
The charger would still work. And then around that, you've effectively just got a lot of contactors which are moving power around the charger. So what's called buzz bars, which are copper, which conduct electricity. You've got magnetics, which are the contactors, which again are to allow the machine to turn off and then to turn on. And then you've got a little bit of sort of computing on the door, which is your PCBs. That's been an awful part of the supply chain for everyone involved in the industry over the last few years, is getting hold of PCBs.
And so tell me, the power control boards?
Power circuit boards.
Power circuit boards, yeah. Okay.
And those are, like sort of microchip assemblies, which mini computers, really, to think of them as. They might, for example, be running your screen on the front of the charger, telling the charger what to do. Right. And then you've effectively, for us, got liquid coolant that's circling all the way around the charger in a closed loop. And so we seal off the top 2/3 of the charger from the environment, and that coolant goes around the hot areas and cools them down. And in fact, it's interesting. We could perhaps show you the module, but on the back of it is a water block which the coolant goes through. It looks like a maze. So the liquid sort of runs all across the back of the DC to DC module, and it circulates around in this closed loop, and you don't need to change that coolant for 5 years. So it just sits in there and runs around in this closed circuit loop. Very different from a usual air-cooled charger, which sucks the air in, pushes it across, and then pushes the hot air out. Ours is sealed, and then the hot air comes out the base of the charger via a fan, and nothing can get sucked into the top 2/3.
Right. But now, the other thing that is, in terms of chargers, like 1575 kilowatts, been around a long time. The next generation, when you do see 350 kilowatts, so I've used a 350 kilowatt capable charger on a Porsche Taycan. That's the only vehicle I've used where it would actually take something close to that.
The Leaf wouldn't have been able to deal with it.
Leaf was a little bit worried, I think. That I might try it on
the Leaf said, "What's happened here?" Yeah.
But it was and that was with GridSafe. So we've mentioned them already. So it's fair to mention them because it was like day 2 when they opened their charger, and I plugged the Taycan in and nothing happened, and the charger went dead and nothing worked, and they all came out with their laptops and opened everything, and then it was very simple. Whatever went wrong, it wasn't a big problem.
Fix it.
But in the time that we realised it was charging, and they were excited too. It's on, and I went, "Oh, it's amazing! It's doing it!" And we looked at that, and then we looked at the screen. Yeah, it's definitely on. Then I walked round to the car. In that time, it had added 19 miles range. Yes. So in some seconds, it was unimaginable.
It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Yeah, and we have a couple out in the car park.
Right.
And if you can get onto them, because we've got a lot of people with EVs, it's fantastic. Because as you say, you plug in, and I drive a Tesla Model 3, and within 8 or 9 minutes, it's about 80%. So it's incredibly fast.
Which is like hundreds of kilometres.
Yep, right? 250 kilometres. So.
And where do you see what do you see as the kind of next step in the development of them? Because I guess, is it basically, it's not going to, are we going to go to 500 kilowatts or 1,000, a megawatt?
There will be a megawatt. It will have a role in trucks, maybe shipping, potentially aircraft. Right. In fact, we're talking at the moment, and in fact, we're down with Anduril recently, who have an unmanned underwater vehicle, which is going to need a 1 megawatt. eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and lift. Right. So that's where you're going to see those huge 1 megawatt chargers. They do have a role, but I think for the ordinary driver, we're going to see an alignment on what is a kind of reasonable speed, which drivers are happy with and which the car manufacturers are happy with. We may see a future where the AC conversion doesn't occur on the car at all. So there could be a future, particularly for performance cars, where you take that off the car and you can only do DC fast charge, and you don't do the AC conversion on the car. And that could be a future for a Porsche Taycan, for example, where that's not even occurring on the car. Yeah. But at the moment, it's interesting. We saw, for example, Ionity future-proofed their network with the 350, so they sort of put in an ultra-fast. But we're seeing at the moment a bit of a convergence around the 150 mark, which is where most cars cap out. I think 170 to 80 for the Tesla Model 3, and that's fast enough.
It's very fast. Yeah, I mean, that's my argument in a way. It's just, what's the point of constantly increasing it? In a sense, it's the similar thing to, I want a 400 kilowatt hour battery so I can drive 1,000 miles without stopping. You go, really?
Yeah. I mean, do you really need it?
Have you got a bladder?
Yeah, no, that's and look, if you're mega wealthy and you've got, 6 Porsche Taycans in your garage, maybe you're going to put your own fast DC in there. But for the ordinary driver, you don't need it. And you drive one, you know how it works. You're probably charging a lot at home.
Yes.
You use one on the road when you're doing longer trips or when you've just forgotten to charge for some unknown reason. I mean, we use ours at work a lot, super convenient. I do think workplaces will become a great place to charge, and they're also a great SOP for the grid, because then everyone's charging while they're at work, in a period where otherwise everyone gets home and charges. So there could be a future where there's a lot of workplace charging occurring, and we're starting to see that with wealthier companies.
And it's certainly something I've seen in, for instance, Norway, a very good example, where you go into a big multi-level car park, multi-story car park, and I asked the guy, how many spaces, and I think it was 582, and how many of those have got chargers? Because I could see where we were. He said, "Oh, it's 582."
Yeah,
so
right.
every space you could park a car, you could plug it in.
And multi-story
those weren't
residential.
rapid chargers; they were just.
They were
I guess,
AC.
Yeah, they'd be maybe 10,
and
11 kilowatts.
hotels, like if you're going to drive to the Gold Coast or Noosa or
destination
Brighton,
charging.
you're going to need to charge when you get there, and you're going to ideally that's going to be in the space that the hotel gave you. So I think
and
that's the future.
The chargers that would be installed or something like that, that's not something Tritium.
They'll largely be AC.
Yeah.
What we see is, especially multi-story residential, a couple of fast chargers potentially in your sort of visitor bays where people can move in and out, because you're all going to have a moment where you need rapid charging and you can't wait 24 hours or overnight, and then a whole series of AC throughout the building. And no, we don't play there. For us, they're a commodity. There's a lot of different players in that market.
There's plenty of people making those. Yeah. I mean, I don't want you to get distracted by that, because I want you to carry on making the ones. I want you to carry on making the chargers that work.
That's our intent. Yeah. So our intent is to sort of stay in the kind of fast and ultra fast charging market where we have a point of difference with our technology. We do think the future is probably IP65 rated chargers, just like solar. It started at IP54 and eventually everything became IP65 because it's just a more reliable form of technology where you don't suck things into the charger and get outages because you've sucked in too much, too many particulates. Or maybe there's a future where there are no particulates because cars aren't pushing them out.
Yes, we hope to. Yeah, there's still tyres and brakes we have to deal with it. But
there are.
But that's great. Jane, this has been so good talking to you, because it's really interesting to see what you're up to here, and I'm really grateful. Thank you very much for sharing. And I just want to point out that I think thousands of people are using your chargers in the UK. It's never occurred to them that they're made in Brisbane, Australia.
I know,
think that's extraordinary.
It's a fantastic story, isn't it, to think of an advanced technology company that's developed here in Australia because of the harsh conditions and the solar racing industry.
Yes,
and that in fact they're great chargers to run across the world as we deal with them being in a really different environment. No canopies, out in the full environment, the snow, the sun, the rain.
If you want harsh sunshine, I can explain to people who've never been here. You get some here.
You absolutely do. We give them a great workout.
Yes, you do. That's great. Thanks so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us, Robert.
Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this slightly antipodean slanted news episode. If you're coming along to the show in Sydney, we cannot wait to see you. And we know a lot of people are actually coming. But that's it from me. Time for a cold shower and a chilled stubby. Yeah. Hot enough for you, mate. Jeez. Anyway, if you have been, thank you for watching.